So the next masterclass part of the or crash course in the law that the Rekieta case presents is how drug testing really works. Here, it's one of the fascinating things for me ever since I was a young lawyer, is how you could get people to believe. It's a version of the Milgram experiment. For those that don't remember, and I always said COVID was one big, massive, global Milgram experiment. For those that don't know, the Milgram experiment was somebody would come in, people would come in and they would just meet somebody in a white lab coat. The person in the white lab coat would never tell them they're a doctor. They wouldn't even tell them that. Just a white lab coat. So they look like, oh, there must be a scientist, must be a doctor. They'd sit them down and say, it's very important you help us in this process. And I'm going to be reading questions of this person across this, in this other room that you can see right across from you. And when they give the wrong answer, I need you to shock them and just turn up the electricity. And at some point, it's going to go up higher and higher and higher and higher. And we need this to get their compliance. And the whole experiment was testing whether somebody would so defer to authority, they would do whatever they did, even to the point of shocking a random stranger to death for no apparent reason. Over half of Americans were, woohoo! They would shock a stranger to death. Now, they didn't know the person across from them was actually an actor and be faking the pain and the death. As far as they know, they'd be, oh, look, they're dying. Okay. Guy in the white lab coat told me to do it. So the other thing they were studying was who were the no people, because they were trying to figure out how to get mass compliance. And their biggest concern wasn't the people that said yes. It was the people like, who are you? There's some schmuck in a white lab coat. It's like I used to say, I wanted to write a version of Roger Fulgham's book, Everything I Needed to Learn, I Learned in Kindergarten, which was this, kind of sweet, nice little book. And the nature of it, that and I always said, yeah, I'm going to do a version of that. Everything I needed to learn, I did learn in kindergarten. I'm dropped off with some random stranger, and the random stranger tells me what I can do, when I can do it, where I can do it, how I can do it. And if I don't, they deprive me of pleasure. No recess for you, no fruit punch for you, no cookies for you. And then they inflict pain, social isolation, go stand in the corner. Or, and when I was a kid, they whooped you. And I was like, yeah, that's the government right there, writ large. Some random stranger telling you what to do for no apparent good reason. And even when I was a kid, I think there's a picture I've shared when I was 5 years old. And I'm looking towards the camera like, this is some nonsense right here. When I was 5. So what happens is the sort of the nature of the beast, the nature of the animal, is that people will believe the government, especially if they say it's a scientific test. Forensic labs. I represented a whistleblower in Tennessee who had been one of the first whistleblowers 30 years before in Michigan. He had worked in the state crime lab, pointed out how riddled with fraud they were, how riddled with bad methods they were. So it has been known that state crime labs are a joke from day one. But we got CSI on TV, and it tells us it's all good. And people have grown accustomed to, well, it came from a government lab. Must be true. How do you think they keep employed? It's not by reporting the wrong thing. Little point in the Karen Reed case. The cop apparently admitted that the coroner got it wrong the first time because we weren't there to help her out. Yeah, exactly. Like that George Floyd one. Remember the coroner put, it looks like a drug overdose. They're like, no. Wrong answer. Go back and do that again. So they understand how they get paid and keep their job. And let's say you're a drug lab. You keep getting paid as the more drug tests you do. And you're not going to keep getting paid if your drug tests keep always coming back negative. That's not why you're there. You're there to get positive drug tests, by golly. And the more positive drug tests, the more drug tests you get, the more money you get. That's the scam. The other thing is, if you study the science of some of these methods of testing, is guess who prints and publishes them? Guess who does all the peer review work? It's like Big Pharma. It's like when they say, oh, this drug is clearly safe and effective. I'm like, who said so? Well, this clinical trial, Mr. Barnes. And I'm like, Who conducted it? Oh, the same company that's getting rich off the drug? Do you think that might be a conflict of interest? Maybe that's why 1 out of 3 drugs the FDA even has to revoke. After saying they're safe and effective, 1 out of 3. Oops, sorry about that. Pull it back, right? So all the people who print about the science of these different kinds of testing are all people who get rich off the testing. They have no interest, no incentive whatsoever to tell you the testing is garbage. There's all kinds of problems with the testing, of course. So one issue is, like in this case, they did hair testing, apparently. All right. There's a reason why CPS loves hair testing. It's for the same reason why the federal government doesn't allow hair testing to be the basis of a drug test by itself. Same reason truckers cannot be fired based on a hair test by itself. It's because they're notoriously inaccurate. Let me give you an example. I'll give you 2 illustrations. The first one is in Spain some years ago. They did a test of drug testing where they were doing it for a different reason. But the results showed that 1 out of 4 kids in Barcelona tested positive for cocaine. Now, do you think, and these are young kids, do you think 1 out of 4 young kids in Barcelona was lining up doing coke each day before school? It was a huge warning sign that these tests were not accurate. I can give you another example of that. In the truckers case, they've been fighting this for decades. That's where the Teamsters, I'll give them credit, the tough little sons of gun. They basically they do hair testing, but they require them to do an immediate follow-up if the hair test comes back positive. Now, the reason why some employees liked hair testing is that for a whole bunch of drugs, you get false negatives, particularly for pot. 75% of the time, people who admitted using pot tested negative for pot with hair testing. So they love hair testing, right? But if you tested positive for a drug, under the rules, because of the unreliability, you have to then do either a blood, saliva, or urine test. And over 90% of the time, false positives turn out negative when they do blood, urine, or saliva. Isn't that a pretty good indicator that this test is garbage? Of course, the problem with it, and that doesn't even get into the other problems that they admit with hair testing, which is, and this is true of testing in general, right? So dealing with this in the Amos Miller case, right, is how was the hair gathered? How was the chain of custody? And then how was it tested? Because the problem with, particularly with hair testing, unlike blood testing, urine testing, or saliva testing, which has its own problems, but not nearly as bad as hair testing, is external contamination. Generally what they found, for example, when they tested kids of parents who were drug users, they found about a 95% rate that the hair test would test positive for cocaine. What's amazing is all these people are running with this idea that, the hair test positive, so that means the kid is doing cocaine. That's not why they do the test. Cocaine's in the environment. And hair, it shows up all the time. To give you an idea of how much it shows up all the time on your hair, over 90% of narcotics officers test positive for cocaine on their hair testing. Okay, so that gives you an idea. And so the CPS loves this because they know if there's any drugs around at all, chances are very high there's going to be a positive drug test, and they can use that to scare the court and scare other people. Oh my goodness, maybe the kid's doing drugs. Now there's a little giveaway here from the documents. Here by reading what's not there. If they were actually worried that a kid was using drugs, there would be a whole bunch of follow-up emergency medical treatment. There's none of that. They know the kid's not using, right? So the goal is to make the parent look bad by using hair tests because they test at a higher rate. Well, what's striking here was 5 kids, 4 out of 5, no drugs at all in the hair. So somehow, whatever's happening, they're not around the drugs at all, which, by the way, is a warning sign that the drug test with the 5th kid is probably wrong. It's probably a false positive. The other problem was it tested so high. It tested like 10 times. If the kid had been around that many, the kid would be dead, put it simply, which strongly suggests contamination. that something happened along the testing process that somebody screwed up. And that's easy to happen. You had narcotics officers at the scene. If they interact with the kid, they've tested people who interact with narcotics officers. They have a very high rate of testing positive. Like I said, go back to the Barcelona one. 1 out of 4 kids, right? Something's wrong in the test to produce that outcome. So but that's what they do with the testing, and it sounds so scientific that it's meant to railroad you and steamroll you without saying, hold on a second, that sounds a little bit fishy. The way they did it and tried to do it Amos Miller is the test kept coming back negative. So what do you think the lab did? Well, we're just going to call that inconclusive. Yeah, inconclusive. Right, that's the scam. They've been running it for forever. And unfortunately for Rekieta, he's got to live it. But it is a crash course in the law. And it's also a reminder of why we shouldn't have CPS, shouldn't even exist. It's proven to be a complete failure as an agency. Our remedy, if there's actual abuse and serious neglect occurring, is other family members. That has to be the remedy. Not having the state involved in this at any level. It has failed and is dangerous as an experiment. We've seen it and witnessed it for too long and too often. And I say this as someone who has represented more victims of abuse than most lawyers out there have ever done. And we'll see if, how Rekieta is able to maneuver through this minefield. But it seems to me there's a lot of local officials out to get him. Because you look around, not only is it extremely rare to do an arrest warrant for just an allegation of drug use, extremely rare to seize a person's kids solely on the basis of a parent's supposed drug use. That has major problems. The constitutional requirement is there actually be neglect and abuse of the children. For example, here's what's also missing, right? If you're the CPS, you really care about the kid. You do a basic medical exam and you do a basic interview. You find out, is there actual evidence of neglect and abuse, malnutrition, inability to physically function? None of that's there. Now, do you think either one of two things is possible? Either they deliberately chose not to do those tests because they don't want to have the answers come back against them, or they did do those tests and they're hiding them from the record because they came back against them. Either way, the lack of what should be present tells you that their case concerning his kids is a fake case. But it won't stop. It won't stop the haters from spreading everything. One last footnote: I had warned the people connected to Kiwi Farms. I briefly represented Josh, the operator of Kiwi Farms, as a favor to Nick Rekieta, by the way, who asked me to do it very cheap, and I did it ridiculously cheap, and referred him to lawyers that have been able to help him all the way through. I put out there that said, putting out this statement that you want the body camera footage out there is going to lead to people wanting to dox the kids. And his lawyer said, no, he would never want that. And now what do we have on Kiwi Farms? Publishing documents, doxing the kids. That's what he was unleashing. Because it's the mindset of those sick group of people that are over there. And that are part of that whole subculture. So, but that's the mini crash course Barnes Law School presented through the Rekieta case. Second, they took Rekieta's kids away completely and gave them to a stranger, a state-approved stranger. Not allowed to even be around them without supervision, even though there's been no documented allegation whatsoever of actual abuse or neglect. So that tells you that's what happens. That pastor should have should not be a pastor. If you don't know that by now, if you know not to get the state involved in anything like that. How many times have I heard these conservative pastors say, Robert, we shouldn't have any aid to poor people. That should be an obligation of the church. And I'm like, well, there ain't nothing stopping you. Just FYI. You can take over that any day of the week. But they say, but then the same people go run to the worst agency that hates religious values to empower them to take control of people's kids. Unbelievable. That's why I said from day one, anyone who thinks this is a good idea is an idiot. If you understand how drug addicts get treated, or people with drug issues get treated, in the criminal justice system, you would know that's a horrendous idea. And if you understand how CPS operates, you understand that's a horrendous idea. So if you're out there, never get CPS involved. Ever, ever. Always bad. Always bad. Use family and friends, other people to try to work out whatever needs to be worked out. If you have real abuse, you make a criminal referral to the actual government officials. Short of that, don't ever get involved. Don't ever get the state involved. Just that was always worse. Always worse. And those kids later on are going to hate everybody who helped facilitate that. Guarantee you've seen it many, many, many times. By the way, here's the most common reaction, and they know this. When they bring this mass pressure on somebody that they think has a serious drug problem, the most common reaction is a spiral downward by the parent. The parents often go into often have overdose deaths. Like that's what they're trying to do. And why do I say they're trying to do it? Because they know it. This is, by the way, prisons, for example. Years ago, they did a study on putting these images up. If you've ever been to a jail, it drives me nuts, or another or federal prison. All these like love your kids, family photos, all these kind of things everywhere. And they were sold as this will help promote the person being good so they can get out early to see their kid. But they did a study and they knew that's not what happened. It actually caused them psychological harm because it reminded them what wasn't there. And it led to worse behaviors. And what do you think they did with the photos and posters after that? They put up more of them. Because that's who the government is. And people who forgot that is just incredible. So someone asked, what's a white pill in all this, Barnes? Fair question. Nick's response last night on his show, that he understands this is what's going on, and he is not going to fold, not going to capitulate, not going to cower, not going to bow, going to assert all his rights and remedies no matter what. And he's going to fight for his kids and fight for his wife and fight for his freedoms and everyone else's, no matter what they bring it to him and no matter what they bring at him. That is the right mindset and mentality. It is the only one that can succeed. He's not spiraling downward like most parents do in this situation. He's doing just the opposite. You can see it physically demonstrated by when he's talking to people. So credit to him here's somebody who has a bunch of people that are friends that he helped promote, that he helped make money, backstabbing him with joy on a regular basis. His own pastor being the source of causing him this set of nightmare of problems. And I get people who say he made a bunch of mistakes that got him here in part. No doubt about that. But that's separate from what he faced and what he has faced. And how these were horrendous choices by other people, by the way, who should not be let off the hook. But look at if you were in that situation. So addiction is known, assuming that's the case. I don't know it to be the case. But even if it were the case, addiction is known to be a medical treatment, medically diagnosed. We want to attribute moral qualities to it. There's way too much data. If anybody's experienced anyone that knows somebody who's gone through it, it is not easy to be morally judgmental. If you've seen enough of it, if you've witnessed enough of it, then you know that it is difficult as heck to deal with. And that there are physical consequences and ramifications. And that moral judgment is the biggest mistake that can be made in that process, in my experience, and from what I've read and reviewed. But, that you've got, so assuming you're facing a major medical issue, all of a sudden your kids are at risk, your wife's at risk, you're at risk, your liberty's at risk, your property's at risk, your reputation's at risk, everything you've worked for is at risk, and some of your so-called friends and allies, many of whom you've made money for and made famous, are backstabbing you on a daily basis for glee, are doing comedy shows and drama shows that attack you for glee. And you have the government coming at you with everything possible. It would be very easy to capitulate. It would be very easy to fold. It would be very easy to go into a downward negative spiral like most people do in this situation. He has not. And that's credit to him. So whatever mistakes or failures you believe he's made, that to me is a sign of character. And it's the right decision to make for him, for his family, for his kids, and for core constitutional liberties in this country. So that to me is the white pill in the story so far.